At 37,000 feet, Derek watched his 8-month-old daughter turn purple. Rosie had been screaming for 2 hours. Passengers whispered. A flight attendant moved toward him with that look, the one that meant he was failing. His hands shook as he tried everything he knew, which wasn't much. He was 8 months into this alone. 8 months since Madison died, giving birth to the baby now suffocating in his arms. Then a stranger stood up. She walked down the aisle, took Rosie from him without asking, and the cabin went silent. Who was she? And why would that moment haunt him for the next 8 months? The flight had started badly and gotten worse. Derek had boarded the red-eye from Chicago to Seattle, with Rosie strapped to his chest in a carrier that still smelled faintly of spit-up and lavender detergent. He'd chosen the night flight on purpose. Rosie usually slept through the night now most nights, anyway, and he'd thought if he timed it right, she'd sleep the whole way. He'd even sprung for the extra legroom seat, the one that cost an additional $60 he didn't really have, because he figured the space might help. It didn't help. Rosie had been fussy during boarding, squirming against his chest while he tried to collapse the stroller with one hand and juggle the diaper bag with the other. A businessman in a dark suit had sighed loudly behind him. Derek had mumbled an apology and finally kicked the stroller closed, sweat already gathering at his collar. By the time they reached cruising altitude, Rosie was crying. Not the tired, winding down cry that meant sleep was coming. The other kind. The sharp, escalating wail that made every muscle in Derek's body tense because he knew what it meant. This wasn't going to stop. He tried the bottle first. Rosie turned her head away, arching her back. He tried the pacifier. She spat it out. He stood up and bounced her gently, the way the pediatrician had shown him, the way Madison used to do. Rosie only screamed louder. The cabin lights had been dimmed for the night flight. Most passengers had settled in with neck pillows and eye masks, but now heads were turning. Derek saw a woman 2 rows up glance back with narrowed eyes. A man across the aisle pulled his headphones tighter. Derek sat back down and tried to stay calm. He checked her diaper. Dry. He felt her forehead. Cool. He rocked her, hummed to her, whispered that everything was okay, even though his voice was shaking and he wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. 8 months. He'd been doing this for 8 months, and he still didn't know what he was doing. Madison would have known. Madison always knew. She'd had this way of reading Rosie even before the baby was born, like they were connected by something Derek couldn't access. She used to place her hand on her belly and say she could feel what the baby needed. Derek had thought it was just pregnancy talk, the kind of thing people said. But after Rosie was born in those few minutes before everything went wrong, Madison had held her and looked into her eyes and said, "She's sensitive. She feels everything." Then Madison was gone, and Derek was left with a newborn who felt everything and a father who felt nothing but terror. Rosie's cries grew sharper. A flight attendant appeared beside him, her smile professional but strained. "Sir, is there anything I can get for you?" she asked. Derek looked up at her, his face hot. "I'm sorry. I'm trying. She's usually not like this." The flight attendant's smile didn't change. "I understand, but some of the other passengers are trying to sleep. Would you be able to take her to the back of the cabin? It might help." It wouldn't help. Derek knew that. But he nodded anyway, because what else could he do? He stood again, holding Rosie against his shoulder, and started toward the back. Every step felt like a walk of shame. He could feel eyes on him, could sense the irritation radiating from the darkened rows. A baby's scream on a red-eye flight. He was that guy now, the one everyone hated. By the time he reached the galley at the back, his shirt was soaked with sweat and Rosie's face was red and blotchy. She'd been crying for nearly 2 hours. He didn't know how much longer he could take it. Didn't know how much longer she could take it. He tried everything again. Bottle, pacifier, rocking, singing. Nothing worked. Rosie's cries had turned into that desperate, breathless sobbing that made Derek's chest ache. She was exhausted. He was exhausted. And he had no idea how to fix this. The flight attendant came back, her expression less patient now. "Sir, I'm going to need you to She stopped mid-sentence. Someone was walking toward them. A woman, moving quickly down the aisle. Derek barely registered her at first, just another passenger annoyed by the noise, probably coming back to complain. But then she was right in front of him. And she wasn't complaining. "May I?" the woman said. Derek blinked at her. She was younger than him, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail and tired eyes. She wore jeans and an oversized cardigan, and there was something about the way she stood solid, certain that made Derek's throat tighten. "May you what?" he managed. "Hold her," the woman said simply. She didn't wait for an answer. She just reached out and took Rosie from his arms. Derek let her. He didn't know why. Maybe because he was too tired to argue. Maybe because he'd already tried everything else. Maybe because the way this stranger looked at Rosie, calm, unflinching, made something in him crack open. The woman settled Rosie against her shoulder and started swaying, a gentle side-to-side motion. Then she started humming. Low and soft, barely audible over the engine noise. After a few seconds, the humming became words, though Derek couldn't make them out at first. Rosie's cries began to soften. Derek stared. The woman kept swaying, kept singing, if you could call it singing. It was more like a whisper with melody. Something old and worn in. The kind of song that sounded like it had been passed down through generations. Within 30 seconds, Rosie's sobbing had turned to hiccups. Within a minute, she was quiet. The cabin felt impossibly still. The woman looked down at Rosie, her expression soft, almost sad. Then she looked up at Derek. "She's okay," the woman said quietly. She just needed someone to tell her it's okay. Derek couldn't speak. His hands were still raised slightly, frozen in the shape of holding his daughter. He felt like he'd just watched something impossible. The flight attendant, who'd been standing nearby, cleared her throat. "Well, that's good. Thank you." The woman ignored her. She kept her eyes on Derek. "You're doing this alone, aren't you?" Derek's jaw tightened. He nodded. "Me too," the woman said. She glanced back toward her seat, and Derek followed her gaze. A little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old, sat curled up in the window seat, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She was watching them with wide, solemn eyes. "Her name's Hazel," the woman said. "I'm Cassidy." "Derek," he said. His voice came out rough. "And that's Rosie." Cassidy looked back down at Rosie, who was now completely still. Her tiny body relaxed against Cassidy's chest. "She's beautiful." Derek swallowed hard. "Thank you for whatever you just did." Cassidy gave a small, tired smile. "It's a lullaby my mom used to sing. I didn't even realize I was doing it until she stopped crying." Her smile faded. "My mom passed away 3 weeks ago." Derek didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell her he understood, that he'd lost someone too, but the words stuck in his throat. Cassidy seemed to sense it. She shifted Rosie gently, preparing to hand her back. "You'll figure it out," she said quietly. "The alone part. It doesn't feel like it now, but you will." Derek took Rosie back into his arms. The baby stayed asleep, her breathing soft and even. He looked at Cassidy, this stranger who'd just saved him from completely falling apart, and felt something he hadn't felt in 8 months. Not hope, exactly. But maybe the edge of it. "How do you do it?" Derek asked. "How do you keep going when you're this tired?" Cassidy's eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw it the same exhaustion, the same loneliness. "You just do," she said. "Because there's no other option." They stood there for a moment, 2 people holding the weight of too much, neither one knowing how to put it down. Then Cassidy reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled receipt. She grabbed a pen from the flight attendant's station and scribbled something on the back. "This is where I work," she said, handing it to Derek. "Rosewood Cafe, in Capitol Hill. If you ever need. I don't know. Someone who gets it." Derek looked down at the paper. An address, a phone number, an offer he didn't know if he'd ever be brave enough to take. When he looked up, Cassidy was already walking back to her seat. Hazel reached for her as she sat down, and Cassidy pulled the little girl close. Derek stood there, Rosie asleep in his arms, the paper clutched in his hand. The plane hummed around him. Passengers shifted back into sleep. The flight attendant returned to her station, and Derek wondered if he'd just been handed a lifeline or another kind of loss waiting to happen. Derek kept the receipt in his wallet for 3 days before he even looked at the address. He told himself he was too busy. Rosie had a pediatrician appointment on Monday. There was laundry to do, bottles to sterilize, a crib mattress that needed replacing because Rosie had somehow learned to pull herself up and the old one was sagging in the middle. The days blurred together in a haze of diapers and feedings and sleepless nights that left Derek feeling like he was moving underwater. But that wasn't why he didn't look at the receipt. He didn't look at it because he was afraid of what it meant. Afraid that if he went to that cafe, if he saw Cassidy again, he'd be admitting something he wasn't ready to admit. That he needed help. That he was drowning. That 8 months into this, he still had no idea what he was doing. On Thursday, Rosie woke up screaming at 2 a.m. Derek stumbled into her room, his eyes barely open, and picked her up. She was burning hot. He checked her temperature 101.4. Not dangerously high, but high enough to send panic shooting through his chest. He called the nurse line. They told him to give her infant acetaminophen and monitor her through the night. He did. He sat in the rocking chair in her nursery, holding her against his chest while she whimpered and squirmed. And he thought about Madison. Madison would have known if this was serious. She would have known whether to take Rosie to the emergency room or wait it out. She would have known how to make Rosie comfortable, how to soothe her, how to be the kind of parent Derek was failing to be. By dawn, Rosie's fever had broken. Derek put her back in her crib and stood there watching her sleep, his whole body aching with exhaustion and something deeper, something that felt like grief wrapped around failure. He pulled out his wallet and looked at the receipt. Rosewood Cafe, Capitol Hill. He put it back. 2 weeks later, he drove past the cafe for the first time. He hadn't meant to. He'd been running errands, grocery store, pharmacy, post office, and when he plugged the pharmacy address into his GPS, it took him down a street he didn't recognize. And there it was. A small corner cafe with a hand-painted sign and flowers in window boxes. Through the glass, he could see wooden tables and mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu on the wall. He slowed down but didn't stop. Rosie was asleep in her car seat. The street was busy. He told himself he'd come back another time. He drove past it again 3 days later, then again the following week. Each time, he slowed down. Each time, he kept driving. The thing was, he couldn't stop thinking about that moment on the plane. The way Cassidy had taken Rosie without hesitation, without fear. The way she'd known exactly what to do, and more than that, the way she'd looked at him. Not with pity, not with judgment, with recognition. You're doing this alone, aren't you? Me too. Derek had spent 8 months feeling like he was the only person in the world who didn't know how to do this. Every other parent he saw at the pediatrician's office, at the grocery store, in the parenting groups he'd tried to join online seemed to have it figured out. They knew the right words, the right techniques, the right way to hold their babies so they didn't cry. They belonged to a club Derek couldn't access. But Cassidy had looked just as tired as he felt, just as lost. And somehow that had made him feel less alone than anything else in 8 months. Which was exactly why he couldn't walk into that cafe. Because if he did, if he let himself believe that maybe someone understood, and then it turned out he was wrong if Cassidy didn't remember him, or worse, if she did remember but had only given him that receipt out of politeness, he didn't think he could take it. Better to stay in the uncertainty. Better to keep driving past. Rosie's first birthday came in mid-December. Derek made cupcakes from a box mix and let her smash one with her hands while he took pictures he'd probably never look at. His mom called from Florida and sang happy birthday over speakerphone. His sister sent a package with clothes Rosie would grow out of in 3 months. No one mentioned Madison. They never did anymore. Like if they didn't say her name, Derek might forget to be sad. He put Rosie down for her nap and sat on the couch with his phone, scrolling through photos from the hospital. Madison holding Rosie for the first time, her face exhausted and radiant. Madison asleep with the baby on her chest, both of them peaceful. Madison looking at the camera, at Derek, her eyes full of something he couldn't name. He'd taken that photo minutes before the hemorrhaging started, minutes before the nurses rushed in and pushed him out of the room, minutes before everything went wrong in ways he still couldn't fully process. There was a video, too. He'd almost forgotten about it. Madison had made him film her, right after Rosie was born, when the nurses were still cleaning up and Derek was trying not to fall apart from relief and terror and love. "I want to tell her something," Madison had said, her voice weak but steady. "In case I'm not here to tell her later." Derek had told her not to talk like that. She'd ignored him. He'd never watched the video. Not once in 12 months. But now he opened it, his hands shaking, and pressed play. Madison's face filled the screen. She looked so young, so alive. "Hi, baby girl," she said, her words slightly slurred from the medication. "I'm your mom, and I love you more than anything in the world. I know I just met you, but I already know everything about you. I know you're going to be sensitive and smart and so strong." She took a breath, wincing slightly. "I want you to know something. If I'm not here, and God, I hope I am, but if I'm not, I want you to know that your dad is the best man I've ever met. He's going to take such good care of you. He's going to love you enough for both of us." Her eyes shifted, looking past the camera at Derek. "And Derek, if you're watching this, if I'm really gone, don't you dare do this alone. Don't you dare shut everyone out because you think that's what being strong means. Find someone who sees you, someone who loves Rosie the way I would have." The video ended. Derek sat there, the phone still in his hand, tears running down his face. He'd spent a year trying to honor Madison's memory, by doing everything himself, by being strong, by not needing anyone, but that's not what she'd asked for. She'd asked him to find someone. He pulled out his wallet and looked at the receipt again. The ink was starting to fade. He'd carried it for so long the paper was soft and creased. Rosewood Cafe. He put Rosie in the car. The drive to Capitol Hill took 20 minutes. Derek's hands were sweating on the steering wheel. He parked across the street from the cafe and sat there, the engine idling, Rosie babbling to herself in the back seat. Through the window, he could see people inside. A man at the counter, reading a newspaper. 2 women at a corner table, laughing over coffee. And behind the counter, pulling a tray of pastries from the oven, Cassidy. She looked the same. Hair pulled back, sleeves pushed up, moving with that same steady competence she'd had on the plane. She said something to the man at the counter, and he smiled. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned toward the espresso machine. Derek's throat tightened. She probably didn't even remember him. 8 months was a long time. She'd given him that receipt because she was kind, because she'd seen a struggling father and wanted to help. But that didn't mean she'd been thinking about him the way he'd been thinking about her. He was about to start the car and leave when Rosie made a sound. Not crying. Something else. A small, deliberate noise that made Derek turn around. Rosie was looking out the window, directly at the cafe. And as Derek watched, she lifted one small hand and reached toward the glass like she was trying to touch something. "What is it, baby?" Derek said softly. Rosie made the noise again. And this time, Derek recognized it. It was the melody. The lullaby. The one Cassidy had hummed on the plane. Derek's breath caught. Rosie couldn't possibly remember that. She'd been 8 months old. But there she was, humming the same notes, her face focused and intent. He looked back at the cafe, at Cassidy, at the possibility of walking through that door and risking everything. Then he looked at Rosie again, at the daughter who'd just turned 1, who was sensitive and smart and so strong, just like Madison had said she'd be, who deserved a father brave enough to try. Derek turned off the engine, but he didn't get out of the car. He sat there for 10 minutes, watching the cafe, his heart pounding. He watched Cassidy hand a coffee to a customer, watched her wipe down the counter, watched her glance toward the window, her gaze passing right over his car without stopping. Then a little girl ran up to her. Hazel. She was bigger than she'd been on the plane, her hair longer. But Derek recognized her instantly. She tugged on Cassidy's apron and held up a piece of paper, a drawing, probably. Cassidy bent down, examining it seriously, then pulled Hazel into a quick hug. Derek's chest ached. That's what Rosie should have. A mother who hugged her like that, who looked at her drawings like they were precious. But Rosie didn't have that. She had Derek, and Derek was a mess. He started the car and drove home. That night, Rosie wouldn't sleep. She kept waking up every hour, crying in a way that didn't sound like pain or hunger or fear. It sounded like loneliness. Derek brought her into his bed. She curled against his chest, her tiny hand fisting in his shirt, and made that humming sound again. The melody from the lullaby. "I know," Derek whispered into the darkness. "I miss her too." He wasn't sure if he meant Madison or Cassidy. Maybe both. Maybe he was just tired of missing people. The next morning, he drove past the cafe again. And the next day, and the day after that. Each time, he told himself he'd stop. Each time, he told himself today was the day he'd walk in. But the fear was always stronger than the hope. The fear that he'd walk in and Cassidy would be polite but distant. The fear that she'd remember him and regret giving him that receipt. The fear that he'd find out she was exactly the person he needed and he'd mess it up because that's what he did, he messed things up. Madison had died because of him. Because he'd wanted a baby. Because he'd convinced her they were ready. Because he hadn't seen the signs that something was wrong until it was too late. How could he trust himself with someone else's heart? November came. The rain started. Seattle turned gray and cold, and Derek stopped driving past the cafe. He told himself it was because the weather made it harder to get Rosie in and out of the car. He told himself he was being practical. He was lying. The truth was, he'd realized something. If he never walked through that door, he'd never have to face what came next. He could keep the memory of Cassidy exactly as it was, perfect, untouchable, a moment of grace on the worst night of his life. He could keep the receipt in his wallet and tell himself that someday, when he was ready, he'd use it. Someday, the safest lie he'd ever told himself. But Rosie kept humming that melody. And every time she did, Derek heard Madison's voice. "Don't you dare do this alone." December deepened. The streets turned white with frost. Christmas decorations appeared in windows. Derek bought Rosie toys she was too young to appreciate and took pictures he sent to his family. His mom asked if he was doing okay. He said yes. Another lie. On a gray morning in mid-December, 8 months to the day since that flight, Derek woke up to the sound of Rosie singing. Not crying. Singing. He went to her room and found her standing in her crib, holding on to the railing, looking out the window at the gray morning. And she was humming Cassidy's lullaby, clear and perfect. Like she'd been practicing. Derek stood in the doorway, listening, and something inside him broke open. He'd spent 8 months being afraid. 8 months protecting himself from more loss. 8 months honoring Madison by doing exactly what she'd asked him not to do. He picked up Rosie and held her close. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kept humming. "Okay," Derek whispered. "Okay, you're right. We have to try." He got them both dressed. He made sure the diaper bag was packed. He put Rosie in the car seat, his hands shaking so badly he almost couldn't buckle the straps. Then he drove to Capitol Hill. This time, he didn't park across the street. He pulled right up in front of Rosewood Cafe, turned off the engine, and got out before he could change his mind. The cafe was busy. Through the window, Derek could see every table full, a line at the counter. He almost turned around. But then Rosie made that humming sound again, and he knew he couldn't. He pushed open the door. The warmth hit Derek first. That and the smell of coffee and something baking, sweet and rich. The cafe was smaller than it looked from outside, crowded with mismatched furniture and plants hanging in the windows. A chalkboard behind the counter listed drinks in careful handwriting. Christmas lights were strung along the ceiling even though it was still 2 weeks until the holiday. Derek stood just inside the door, Rosie in his arms, and felt every person in the room turn to look at him. No, not at him, at Rosie, because Rosie had started humming. Loud enough that the woman at the nearest table glanced up from her laptop, loud enough that the man waiting for his coffee turned around, and loud enough that Cassidy, who was reaching for a bag of coffee beans on a high shelf, went completely still. She turned slowly. Her eyes found Derek's across the room. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Derek's heart was hammering so hard he thought everyone in the cafe must be able to hear it. He tried to think of something to say, some explanation for why he was here after 8 months, but his mind was blank. Then Hazel appeared from behind the counter. She'd been coloring at a small table near the espresso machine, but now she was standing, staring at Derek and Rosie with wide eyes. "Mama," Hazel said, her voice high and clear. "It's the airplane man." The cafe went quiet. Cassidy's face did something complicated. Surprise, recognition, something else Derek couldn't read. She set down the coffee beans and came around the counter, moving slowly, like she wasn't sure this was real. "Derek," she said. Not a question. Just his name. "Hi," Derek managed. His voice came out rough. I had your address. From the plane. I thought maybe." He didn't know how to finish the sentence. Rosie did it for him. She reached toward Cassidy and made that humming sound again, clearer this time. The melody was unmistakable. The lullaby. The one Cassidy had sung 8 months ago at 37,000 feet. Cassidy's hand came up to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She remembers." "I don't know how," Derek said. "But she does. She's been humming it for weeks. I thought maybe I was imagining it. But..." Rosie made the sound again, and this time she added something new. A word. Barely formed, but clear enough. "Ma. Ma." Derek's breath stopped. Cassidy's eyes filled with tears. "She doesn't..." Derek started, his voice breaking. "She doesn't call me that. She doesn't call me anything yet. But she's been making that sound, and I didn't understand until just now." Hazel had moved closer. She was standing right in front of Derek now, looking up at Rosie with solemn curiosity. "Is that the baby from the plane?" Hazel asked. "The crying one?" Cassidy nodded, not taking her eyes off Rosie. "Yes, sweetie. That's her. She's not crying now," Hazel observed. "No," Cassidy said softly. "She's not." An older man appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He had gray hair and kind eyes and the solid build of someone who'd spent years on his feet. He looked at Derek, then at Cassidy, then back at Derek. "I'm George," he said. "I own this place. You look like you could use a table." Derek blinked. "I don't want to, there's a line." "There's always a line," George said. "Come on." He led Derek to a corner table near the window and cleared away the previous customer's dishes. Cassidy followed, moving like she was in a dream. Hazel trailed behind her, still watching Rosie with fascination. Derek sat down, settling Rosie on his lap. She immediately reached for the sugar packets in the little ceramic holder on the table, and Derek gently moved them out of reach. His hands were shaking. Cassidy slid into the seat across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Cassidy said, "I thought you weren't coming." Derek looked up at her. "What?" "I thought when you didn't come. After I gave you the address, I thought maybe you didn't need it. Or didn't want it." She was gripping the edge of the table. "I kept watching for you. Every time the door opened, I thought maybe, but you never came. So I figured I'd imagined it. That connection on the plane. I figured it was just a moment and I'd turned it into something bigger because I was lonely." Derek's throat was so tight he could barely speak. "I drove past," he said, "so many times. I'd park across the street and just sit there, watching. I wanted to come in. I couldn't." "Why not?" Cassidy asked. The honest answer was too big for this moment. Too complicated. But Derek tried anyway. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Afraid you wouldn't remember me. Afraid you would. Afraid that if I let someone in and it went wrong, I wouldn't survive it. I already lost." His voice cracked. "I already lost my wife. Rosie's mom. She died hours after Rosie was born. Hemorrhaging. They couldn't stop it. And I know that's not the same as what you went through, but my mom died 3 weeks before that flight," Cassidy said quietly. "She was the only family I had besides Hazel. Her dad's not in the picture. It's just been us since Hazel was born. And my mom, she was supposed to help. She was supposed to teach me how to do this. But then she was gone, and I was just... She stopped, her voice breaking. I was drowning. That whole flight. I was drowning. And then I saw you with Rosie, and you looked exactly how I felt. And I don't know. Maybe that's why I stood up. Because if I could help someone else, maybe I wasn't completely useless. You weren't useless, Derek said. You saved me that night. I was about to fall apart completely. And you knew what to do. Like it was easy. Cassidy shook her head. It wasn't easy. Nothing about this is easy. Some days I can barely get Hazel fed and dressed. Some days I sit in the bathroom and cry because I'm so tired I can't think straight. That lullaby, I didn't even know I was singing it. It just came out. My mom used to sing it to me when I was little, and I guess I needed her that night as much as Rosie needed someone. Hazel had climbed into the chair next to Cassidy and was watching them both with serious eyes. She reached over and patted Cassidy's hand. It's okay, Mama, Hazel said. You don't have to cry. Cassidy pulled Hazel close and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. When she looked back at Derek, her eyes were red but her voice was steady. Why today? Cassidy asked. Why did you finally come in today? Derek looked down at Rosie. She was playing with the buttons on his shirt, humming quietly. Because she told me to, he said. She's been singing your song for weeks. And this morning she sang it so clearly that I knew. I knew I couldn't keep hiding. Hiding from what? Cassidy asked. Derek met her eyes. From the fact that I've been thinking about you every single day for 8 months. From the fact that I haven't felt like I could breathe since Madison died. But when I remember that moment on the plane, when you took Rosie and everything went quiet, that's the only time I've felt anything close to peace. The words hung in the air between them. Derek waited for Cassidy to tell him he was projecting, that he'd built her up into something she wasn't, that 8 months was too long to base a connection on one moment. Instead, Cassidy reached across the table and took his hand. I've thought about you every day too, she said. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that you were just some guy from a plane, but I couldn't stop wondering if you were okay. If Rosie was okay, if you'd figured out how to survive the way I was trying to survive. I haven't, Derek admitted. Survived, I mean. I'm just going through the motions, trying not to screw up too badly. Me too, Cassidy said. Rosie reached for Cassidy's hand. Cassidy let her grab her fingers, and Rosie immediately pulled them toward her mouth. Cassidy laughed, a surprised, watery sound. She's beautiful, Cassidy said. She looks just like you. She looks like Madison, Derek said. Then, softer, I'm terrified I'm going to forget what Madison looked like. That Rosie's going to grow up and I won't be able to tell her anything real about her mom because my memory's already getting fuzzy around the edges. What was she like? Cassidy asked. Madison. No one had asked Derek that in months. Everyone just avoided talking about her, like mentioning her name would make him fall apart. But Cassidy was looking at him with genuine curiosity, like she really wanted to know. She was... Derek searched for the right words. She was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel seen. She remembered details. She'd ask about things you mentioned weeks ago. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. She was terrible at cooking, but she kept trying anyway. She wanted Rosie more than anything. And right before she died, she told me. His voice broke. He took a breath. She told me not to do this alone. She told me to find someone who could love Rosie the way she would have. Cassidy's eyes were swimming with tears. I think she'd be proud of you for coming here today. I don't know about that, Derek said. It took me 8 months. You're here now, Cassidy said. That's what matters. Hazel had been sitting quietly, but now she slid out of her chair and walked around the table to Derek. She looked up at Rosie, who was still in Derek's lap. Can I show her my butterfly? Hazel asked. Derek glanced at Cassidy, who nodded. She's been drawing butterflies all morning, Cassidy explained. It's kind of her thing right now. Hazel ran back to her coloring table and returned with a piece of paper. She held it up for Rosie to see. It was a butterfly, drawn in crayon purple and pink and green, with a smiling face in the center. Rosie stared at it, transfixed. Then she reached out and grabbed the paper, crumpling it slightly in her enthusiasm. "Gentle," Derek said automatically, trying to pry the paper from Rosie's fist. But Hazel just laughed. "It's okay. I'll make her another one. With 4 butterflies. 1 for each of us." Derek looked at Cassidy. Cassidy looked back. "4?" Derek asked softly. Hazel nodded, completely matter-of-fact. "You and Rosie and me and Mama. That's 4. Neither Derek nor Cassidy seemed to know what to say to that. Hazel, unbothered by their silence, went back to her coloring table and started drawing. George appeared with 2 coffees and a plate of pastries. "On the house," he said. Then he looked at Cassidy with a small smile. "Take your time. I've got the counter." After he left, Derek and Cassidy sat there, hands still touching across the table, watching their daughters. Rosie had started humming again. Hazel was drawing intently, her tongue poking out in concentration. "I don't know how to do this," Derek said finally. "I don't know how to let someone in again. I don't know how to not be terrified every second that something's going to go wrong." "I don't either," Cassidy said. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to know. Maybe we just have to try." Derek looked at her. Really looked at her. At the exhaustion in her eyes and the set of her shoulders and the way she was holding his hand like she was afraid he might disappear. "1 day at a time?" Derek asked. Cassidy nodded. 1 coffee at a time, 1 butterfly drawing, 1 lullaby. Rosie chose that moment to lean forward, reaching for Cassidy again. Cassidy took her gently, settling her on her lap, and Rosie immediately relaxed into her chest. And then, without any prompting, Cassidy started humming. The lullaby, the one she'd sung on the plane, the one Rosie had been singing for weeks. Derek watched his daughter's eyes drift closed, watched her breathing slow, watched the tension leave her tiny body as Cassidy swayed gently, still humming. For the first time in over a year, Derek felt something that wasn't fear or grief or exhaustion. He felt hope. Hazel came back to the table with her new drawing. 4 butterflies, just like she'd promised. Purple and pink and green and yellow, all holding hands or wings, or whatever butterflies held. At the bottom, in careful letters, she'd written, "Our family." "Our family," Cassidy corrected gently. "That's what I said," Hazel insisted. Derek looked at the drawing, at the 4 butterflies, at Cassidy holding his sleeping daughter, at Hazel beaming with pride. And he realized Madison had been right. She'd told him to find someone who could love Rosie, but maybe she'd also been telling him to let himself be loved too. "Can I keep this?" Derek asked Hazel, pointing to the drawing. Hazel nodded solemnly. "It's for your house, so you don't forget." "I won't forget," Derek promised. Outside, the December rain started falling. Inside Rosewood Cafe, 2 broken families sat at a corner table and began slowly, carefully, 1 moment at a time to become whole. George watched from behind the counter, smiling to himself. He'd seen this coming from the moment Derek walked through the door. Some things, he'd learned in his 72 years, were simply meant to be. Cassidy handed Rosie back to Derek, and their hands brushed. Neither of them pulled away. "Same time next week?" Cassidy asked quietly. Derek nodded. "Same time next week." It wasn't a promise. Not yet. It was just a beginning. And sometimes, Derek thought as he looked down at his daughter, at Hazel's drawing, at Cassidy's tired, hopeful smile, sometimes a beginning was enough.